In the very beginning, the Bible presents us with a profound mystery, two distinct accounts of creation. Genesis 1 paints a majestic picture of humanity, male and female formed together in the image of God, a divine reflection of unity and equality. Yet, just a few chapters later, Genesis 2 zooms in on a more intimate narrative, revealing Eve as being crafted from Adam's rib, suggesting not just a continuation, but a deeper, layered perspective on human origins. These two accounts raise questions that have fascinated scholars, theologians, and curious minds for centuries. Why does the story shift focus? What does it tell us about the nature of humanity, relationships, and the roles of men and women in the earliest days of creation? This tale is more than just a story of beginnings. It is an invitation to explore ideas about equality, independence, and the human journey from a spiritual and symbolic lens. Could there be a story behind the story, hidden in the text, waiting for us to uncover? Could the first woman symbolize more than just companionship, perhaps the very essence of choice, freedom, and destiny? Today, we will dive into these ancient narratives, exploring the layers, mysteries, and even debates that have surrounded the first humans. Together, we will journey through Genesis, uncover hidden traditions, and reveal the timeless lessons woven into these sacred texts. If you are fascinated by history, theology, and the untold stories behind the Bible, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you won't miss a single exploration into the mysteries that have shaped human understanding for millennia. Your journey into the origins of humanity starts right here. As we continue our journey through the earliest chapters of Genesis, a fascinating tension begins to emerge, one that challenges the simplicity of traditional interpretations. For centuries, Eve has been celebrated as the first woman, the companion fashioned from Adam's rib, the mother of all living. Yet, as scholars and careful readers of the text have observed, there are subtle discrepancies that hint at a far more complex narrative, a story in which Eve might not have been the first woman at all. The idea is as provocative as it is mysterious, prompting us to look closer at the passages and consider the possibility that another female figure existed before her, one who has largely been obscured by centuries of interpretation and theological tradition. In Genesis, humanity is created in a simultaneous act, male and female together, suggesting a shared origin, a co-equal birthright, as if the first human existence was not yet divided into the binary distinctions we have come to take for granted. Then Genesis 2 narrows the lens, introducing Eve in a more intimate act of formation, drawing her from Adam's rib. The juxtaposition of these two accounts raises questions about the sequence and the meaning behind these creations. Could it be that the narrative is preserving memory of an earlier creation, a woman whose story predates Eve's, and whose presence has been largely forgotten in traditional recountings? Some textual clues, subtle yet compelling, give rise to this possibility. The differences in language, the shifts in focus, and even the emphasis on companionship versus co-creation all suggest layers of storytelling that may have been woven together over time. In one account, we witness a universal creation, a sweeping moment that celebrates the image of God in both male and female. In the other, the intimate act of forming Eve emphasizes relational dynamics and roles. These differences may not be contradictions at all, but rather echoes of an older tradition, a hidden narrative that preserves the memory of a woman whose identity and significance remain elusive. The notion of a first woman before Eve challenges more than just chronology. It invites reflection on power, autonomy, and the shaping of human society. If Eve was not the first, then the earliest chapters of human experience may be more diverse, more intricate, and far less straightforward than we have been taught. Perhaps the earlier woman represents a different vision of humanity, one less constrained by dependency or hierarchy, a vision that emphasizes independence, agency, and a unique relationship with the divine. In imagining her, we are forced to confront questions that resonate far beyond Scripture. How do stories shape the way we understand identity and purpose? What do omissions and silences in ancient texts tell us about the societies that preserved them? Exploring this possibility does not diminish Eve's significance, but rather enriches our understanding of the early human story, painting it in deeper, complex hues. It reminds us that Scripture, like history, often carries layers of memory, tradition, and interpretation, each waiting to be examined and understood. By contemplating a woman before Eve, we begin to glimpse a broader, more nuanced vision of creation, one that opens doors to reflection on the roles of men and women, the meaning of companionship, and the enduring mysteries of our beginnings. In following these threads, we are invited into a narrative that is alive, dynamic, and endlessly fascinating, where the line between myth, memory, and meaning blurs, and where the story of humanity is not fixed but continually unfolding. It is within this unfolding story that we begin to see the potential for new insights, for questions that challenge assumptions, and for the recognition that the tale of the first woman or women is far richer and more intricate than any single tradition has told. As our exploration of the earliest human narratives deepens, a shadowy figure emerges from the margins of ancient texts, a presence both intriguing and defiant, whose story challenges the familiar tale of Adam and Eve. Her name is Lilith, and according to sources such as the medieval Jewish work known as the Alphabet of Ben Sira, she was created not from Adam's rib but from the same dust, as an equal partner in the first act of creation. In this version of the story, Lilith stands not as a subordinate companion, but as a fully autonomous being, sharing the divine image with Adam in equal measure, yet unwilling to be constrained by hierarchy or expectations of obedience. Her refusal to submit became the catalyst for a dramatic rupture, one that forced her to leave Eden and, in the process, left the narrative open for the introduction of Eve, who would assume the role more familiar to later traditions. The tale of Lilith resonates with echoes from Genesis 1, where humanity is created male and female together, co-creation that implies equality and shared purpose, and contrasts sharply with Genesis 2, which focuses on the intimate but hierarchical formation of Eve from Adam's rib. In considering Lilith, one begins to see a continuity in the text that has often been overlooked, a bridge between the universal creation of humanity and the relational, gendered dynamics that follow. Her story, though largely absent from canonical scripture, survives in folklore and midrash, preserving a memory of a human experience that predates and, in some ways, complicates the conventional story of Adam and Eve. Lilith's departure from Eden is not simply an act of rebellion. It is a statement about autonomy, the right to self-determination, and the consequences of attempting to impose dominance within a relationship that was initially intended to be equal. In imagining Lilith alongside Eve, the narrative acquires an added depth and richness, suggesting that the creation story is not a linear account but a tapestry woven from multiple threads, each carrying distinct perspectives on gender, power, and human nature. Lilith represents a vision of humanity unbound by subservience, an archetype of independence and strength whose absence in the canonical story shapes the roles that follow. Eve's emergence after Lilith can then be seen not as a replacement but as a continuation, a transformation of the early human story that reflects societal norms and theological interpretations, while leaving traces of an earlier, more egalitarian vision. The interplay between these figures encourages reflection on how traditions are formed, how narratives are edited and preserved, and how the silences between the lines can reveal as much about human values and expectations as the words themselves. By tracing Lilith's story through these ancient texts, one begins to perceive the layered complexity of humanity's beginnings, where equality, autonomy, and relational tension coexist within the foundational myths. Her narrative challenges the simplicity of Eve's story, inviting us to imagine a world in which the first human partnership was negotiated on terms of mutual respect rather than hierarchy, and where the consequences of choice and defiance ripple through the unfolding story of mankind. In this light, the early chapters of Genesis transform from a familiar tale into a dynamic, multifaceted narrative, rich with possibilities, contradictions, and enduring questions about identity, freedom, and the human spirit. Lilith's legacy, though often hidden, reminds us that the story of the first woman or women is far more complex, profound, and provocative than the traditional account alone might suggest, opening the door to a reimagining of the origins of humanity and the intricate interplay of equality, power, and choice in the earliest moments of our collective story. As we continue to trace the complex origins of humanity, the story expands beyond the literal accounts of Adam, Eve, and even Lilith, moving into a realm where mysticism and theological reflection intertwine with the narrative, revealing layers that are often overlooked in conventional readings. Early theologians, Gnostic writers, and mystics pondered the profound implications of creation, proposing that the human story was not merely a sequence of physical events but a reflection of spiritual truths and cosmic archetypes. In these interpretations, Eve herself was more than a single historical figure. She embodied multiple dimensions of existence, sometimes distinguished as a spiritual Eve, a luminous counterpart to the earthly Eve, who represented the tangible, human experience. This duality suggested that the narrative of the first woman was not fixed but fluid, capable of conveying the spiritual as well as the corporeal, offering insight into the human condition that transcends ordinary chronology and lineage. Furthermore, some of these early thinkers advanced the notion that the first humans were not strictly divided into male and female but originated as androgynous or unified beings, a singular form encompassing all aspects of humanity within a perfect wholeness. According to this perspective, the act of separation into male and female was both a physical and metaphysical process, an unfolding of potential, identity, and relational dynamics that mirrored the inherent dualities of existence. This concept resonates with the earlier mention of Lilith, who represented equality and autonomy in human creation, suggesting that the division into male and female carried consequences far beyond the narrative of Eden. It introduced hierarchy, tension, and the conditions under which partnership and individuality would be tested. The Gnostic and mystical interpretations enrich the story by framing these first humans not merely as historical actors but as symbols of unity, fragmentation, and the quest to reconcile the spiritual and the material within the human soul. By weaving together these perspectives, the story of humanity's origins emerges as a tapestry of interlocking narratives, where literal, symbolic, and mystical dimensions coexist. The spiritual Eve mirrors the androgynous first human, embodying the potential for wholeness that the physical narrative of Adam and Eve only begins to hint at. Lilith's rebellion can be reimagined within this context as an early assertion of selfhood and completeness, a refusal to accept division imposed by external authority, while Eve's emergence represents a continuity of the same human potential, now mediated through the dynamics of male and female, relational and individual, earthly and spiritual. The interplay of these figures invites reflection on the deeper questions embedded in the creation story. What does it mean to be human? How do unity and division shape identity? And how do spiritual and physical realities coexist within the same narrative framework? The mystical lens reveals that the origins of humanity were never intended to be understood solely as a simple sequence of events, but as a complex dialogue between the eternal and the temporal, the equal and the hierarchical, the whole and the divided. These layered readings challenge modern audiences to reconsider the familiar story of Adam and Eve, to see in it echoes of a more profound vision where the first humans contained multitudes, where spiritual and physical realities intertwined, and where the separation into male and female was not merely biological but symbolic, shaping the moral, relational, and existential dimensions of human life. By embracing these insights, the narrative of the first humans transforms into a living, evolving story, one that speaks across time to the mysteries of identity, the tension between unity and difference, and the enduring quest for balance, wholeness, and understanding in the human experience, inviting readers and listeners alike to peer beneath the surface of tradition into the layered depths of humanity's beginnings. As the narrative of humanity unfolds, one cannot ignore the curious gaps and ambiguities within the biblical text that hint at a world far larger and more complex than the familiar Garden of Eden. Among these mysteries, the account of Cain presents a striking conundrum. After committing the first murder, he ventures into the land of Nod and finds a wife, a detail that seems inexplicable if Adam and Eve were the sole progenitors of all humankind. The text does not clarify where this woman came from, yet the story assumes her presence as an unquestioned fact, implying a human population that existed outside the confines of Eden, beyond the immediate lineage of the first couple. This subtle but profound detail opens the door to speculation and interpretation, inviting us to consider that the creation narrative may encompass multiple beginnings, or that Adam and Eve were part of a wider human tapestry, rather than the absolute origin of every human soul. The possibility of a pre-Adamic race or other human communities living concurrently with or prior to the Edenic narrative challenges the conventional linear reading of Genesis and reframes the story within a broader, more intricate context. In this expanded view, Eden becomes not an isolated cradle but a focal point within a populated world, a stage for the introduction of moral choice, relational dynamics, and the spiritual journey of a particular lineage, while other humans carried on their own lives, unknown to the canonical figures yet equally real in the sweep of human history. This interpretation resonates with earlier reflections on Lilith, the androgynous first humans, and the layered spiritual readings of Eve, where the text gestures toward complexities that defy simple resolution. The biblical gaps, far from being inconsistencies, suggest a richness of narrative space, a willingness of the text to leave room for questions about origin, identity, and human diversity. Cain's encounter with his wife also underscores the intricate interplay between isolation and community, individual choice and collective existence. If humanity extended beyond Eden, then Adam and Eve's story, though foundational, was only one thread in a larger human fabric, emphasizing that moral and spiritual lessons may apply across many contexts, not solely within the confines of a single family. The notion of multiple beginnings adds depth to the tale of Eden, offering a vision of humanity as a network of lives and destinies, interconnected yet distinct, each bearing the potential for obedience, rebellion, love, and loss. The gaps in the narrative, therefore, serve as an invitation to explore these unseen human realities, to imagine communities, choices, and histories that run parallel to, or precede, the well-known figures of Scripture, enriching our understanding of what it means to be human. Viewed through this lens, the Genesis account becomes a mosaic, where the canonical story of Adam, Eve, and their immediate descendants intersects with wider currents of human experience, hinting at civilizations, cultures, and lives outside the garden yet part of the same created order. These considerations dovetail with mystical and theological interpretations that emphasize the multiplicity of creation, the spiritual versus the physical, and the symbolic as well as the literal truths embedded in the text. By acknowledging the presence of other humans beyond Eden, the narrative expands, challenging readers to hold in mind both the intimate and the expansive, the particular and the universal, and to appreciate the profound complexity of beginnings. In doing, the story of humanity grows richer, suggesting that while Adam and Eve's journey marks the moral and spiritual awakening of humankind, it may have unfolded within a world already alive with human diversity. experience, and potential, offering a vision of creation that is at once intimate, mysterious, and endlessly expansive. As we reach the conclusion of this exploration, it becomes clear that the stories of Adam, Eve, Lilith, and the broader human tapestry are far more than mere accounts of origin. They are narratives layered with profound symbolism, moral inquiry, and enduring human questions. These texts invite us to reflect on themes that transcend time: the nature of equality, the assertion of independence, the weight of covenant, and the pursuit of purpose. In the figure of the first woman, whether seen as Lilith, Eve, or a symbolic embodiment of the androgynous first human, we find a representation of choice, freedom, and destiny. She is not simply the source of humanity's lineage, but a mirror to the complex interplay between autonomy and responsibility, between the exercise of will and the shaping of one's path in a larger moral universe. The recurring motifs of rebellion, cooperation, and moral deliberation underscore the idea that creation is not static but dynamic, inviting each human being into a partnership with the divine and with the world. Lilith's refusal to submit, Eve's decision to eat from the tree, and the later choices of their descendants all resonate as examples of the tension between imposed boundaries and self-directed action. These narratives highlight that freedom and consequence are inseparable. The capacity to choose defines humanity, but it also carries the weight of accountability. In this light, the first woman becomes a symbol not only of beginnings, but of the enduring human struggle to balance personal agency with communal and spiritual obligations, reminding us that destiny is not predetermined but continually forged through decisions, relationships, and understanding. Furthermore, the biblical gaps, such as Cain finding a wife outside Eden, the layered mystical interpretations, and the notion of multiple beginnings, enrich this perspective by illustrating that human history, identity, and moral development are far more expansive than any singular narrative. The stories suggest that while Adam and Eve's journey offers foundational lessons, human experience is diverse, intertwined, and shaped by countless choices across generations. They invite contemplation of how individuality and community coexist, how freedom is exercised responsibly, and how each life contributes to the unfolding story of humanity. Ultimately, these narratives serve as both mirrors and guides. They reflect our innate desires for autonomy, connection, and purpose, and they challenge us to consider the consequences of our choices while embracing the potential for growth, understanding, and transformation. The first woman, in all her forms and interpretations, embodies the universal quest for meaning, the courage to assert one's place in the world, and the enduring hope that each person can shape their destiny within a grand, interconnected creation. Thank you for joining this journey into the depths of these ancient and mysterious stories. If you enjoyed this exploration and want to uncover more hidden layers of history, myth, and meaning, do not forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our future adventures into the stories that shape humanity. Your support helps us continue bringing these fascinating tales to life, and we can't wait to share more with you in the next video.